Hello, and welcome to Bedtime Life Stories. Tonight, let's drift away to a tale of quiet solitude, ancient maps, and the gentle glow of distant stars. Find your most comfortable spot, let your breath deepen, and allow your mind to wander. The Star Key of Northwind Isle. Chapter 1. The Keeper's Quiet Rhythm. The island was a comma in the sentence of the sea, a brief pause in the endless line of horizon. Dawn came with pearl gray light and left with cool indigo, a gentle pendulum that swung each day in a rhythm Elias found comforting. He had lived with this rhythm for many seasons, and each morning he woke before the gulls. Elias's lighthouse rose from a ring of weathered rock, like something meant to outlast words. Its iron steps were polished by his boots, its windows cleaned by his careful cloth, its lamp attended with a reverence that bordered on prayer. The island's paths were few, a thin trail to the cove, another to the small garden where he grew hardy greens and a handful of herbs, and a third path, the oldest, that curved toward an ancient standing stone, sunk into the island's spine. People called the island Northwind, because the wind coming from the north was the last to lose its bite in spring, and the first to sharpen again in autumn. To Elias, the island had many names. He called the cove Hushwater, because the sea there seemed to speak in a lower voice. He called the standing stone Old Memory, because sitting against it, he could feel the sediment of centuries. In his cabin, he kept the star map. It was older than the lighthouse, older than his father, older than the last war. Its leather was a softened, darkened brown. Its binding had a patient looseness from the many hands that had leafed through it. On the first page, in a fine old script, was written, "To those who keep watch when others sleep." He had been keeping watch since he was young, though in those early days his watching was restless, the kind of watch that looked for storms and change. After many years, his watching had grown still. He watched as tides obeyed and stars returned, and light found its familiar routes along the water. The star map taught him this, that what seemed distant could be trusted to come back, but even a quiet heart holds a pocket of curiosity no tide can smooth. And in Elias, that pocket was woven of ink and starlight. The notations in the margins of the map were sparse but elegant. They referred to a pattern visible only when three particular stars, often parted by cloud, season, and angle, drew near enough in human sight to suggest union. "A key," wrote the old hand, "not to open, but to remember what has always been open." Elias had read those words for years. He had traced the pattern in the air on winter nights, his fingers cold and sure. He had brewed tea, he had waited, he had listened to the creak of the lighthouse, as if it spoke sometimes, and fell quiet only to let the sea say its part. In late autumn, when the air grew thin and the sky rang with that clear, bell-like cold, he felt the nearness of the pattern, like a half-remembered tune. He told no one. There was no one to tell. The few boats that stopped by brought flour, oil, news from the mainland, and left again. "The island guards your secrets," the old ferryman had told him years ago. "Just be sure they are secrets you can live with." Elias could live with a secret made of stars. Chapter 2. The Alignment. The night the alignment began was the kind of clear that made breath visible and thoughts slow. The sea, holding a faint silver sheen from the moon, seemed to inhale and exhale as one living body. Elias climbed the tower with a calm he had not earned, but had been given by the island's long patience. He lit the lamp. The great Fresnel lens caught the flame and gentled it into a wide, steady sweep. The beam crossed the bay and returned, stitched a path along a far buoy and across the back of a quiet shoal. It was both work and ceremony. When he was sure of its steadiness, he turned to the lamp-room window and set up the old brass telescope, polished until it carried a memory of every hand that had cared for it. He opened the star map. Pages breathed. The inked constellations, some familiar, some lost to names, seemed to rise from the paper under the lamplight. The margin notes were spare. When the hunter bows, when the river is low, when the lantern winks. Elias had long since learned the names behind the names. He began to watch. Hours flowered and fell. The moon came to its narrowest sliver. The wind hardened for a time, then eased, as if reminded of its manners. The lighthouse beam rode its circles across the water, undisturbed. Near the deepest part of the night, the stars that were usually loose as a handful of salt spilled on dark cloth began to gather. Elias had always believed the pattern would be unmistakable. He had imagined trumpets inside his chest. Instead, the moment arrived the way frost arrives on late grass, precise, unhurried, inevitable. 3 points brightened by very little, and that very little seemed to arrange the sky. He did not speak. He breathed. He traced the triangle on the map, then on the window with the pad of his finger. It hovered above the dark line of sea where the island's oldest stone lay. He checked the notations again. From the sailor's eye, count the steps. He knew the sailor's eye, a weather-gnawed carving near the lighthouse foundation. An eye, chiseled into stone, that watched the water. He had rested his back against it many a summer noon, never thinking it a measure. He let the pattern hold. He watched to learn the rate at which it would turn away. Then he did something he had not done in years. He went down the steps in the deep night with a lantern, opened the door to the cold, and walked the path toward old memory. The island at night was a different country. The rocks had other names. The path was more honest. He took careful steps. The lantern cast a soft, peeled bright circle around his boots. He felt the ground's patient slope underfoot. The beam above continued its slow stitching, a reassuring rhythm against the back of his neck. He reached the sailor's eye. He touched the old carving with his free hand and felt the shallow bowl of the pupil, smoothed by generations of fingers. From the sailor's eye, count the steps, he murmured, the words not to break the silence, but to become part of it. North, said the map. He faced the wind. He counted 47 slow steps, as the margin had suggested. On the 47th, the lantern's light brushed a low arrangement of stones, tucked into a shallow of moss. The cairn. He had sat near it often. He had leaned his back against it and watched the line where ocean becomes sky blur into a single calm. He had never once thought to disturb it. He set the lantern down. He removed one stone, then another, the way one might turn pages of an old book, with care, respect. The stones held the island's dampness, a soft green scent. Beneath them, his fingers met no box, no lock, only a flat slate, carved shallowly with lines that time had tried and failed to erase. The lines were familiar. He traced them with a fingertip and saw the night sky repeating itself in the stone. The same triangle, the same subtle linking. Between the points, the carver had added delicate curves, as if drawing wind. There was one more line, in that same elegant script his map carried. Remember, not to open, but to see. Elias let his hand rest on the stone until the heat of his palm sank in. Then he replaced the cairn, stone by stone. The pattern was not a door, it was a way to look. When he rose, the horizon was just a thought lighter. The lamp overhead finished its last sure rotation before dawn. Elias turned back toward the lighthouse, the lantern swinging softly in his hand, like a small star that had volunteered to walk a little way with him. Chapter 3. Letters in the Quiet. The day that followed carried a secret brightness, as though the island and Elias shared a smile and decided not to mention it. He tended to his tasks with the unhurried grace of a man who knows he is inside a long story. He took his tea at the cove and watched the sea press its cheek to the pebbles and pull away again. Content. He had not expected to write. Yet after noon, he cleared his small desk in the cabin and set paper on it, the good kind reserved for winter inventories and official notices. He dipped his pen. His hand hovered, then began. The letter was to no one and to everyone. He wrote about the way the pattern had assembled, like a thought finding its right words. He wrote about the cairn's slate, worn and steady, the way it returned the sky to him, but more human, as if the island had kept a copy for days when the stars hid. He wrote about his father's hands, that they had been rough with a softness at the center, and about the day they had carried the brass telescope up the steps for the first time. He wrote about the first time he lit the lamp alone, the way his heart had climbed into his throat and then found its way back when the beam went steady. He wrote, too, about loneliness. He did not sharpen it with complaint. He traced it the way one might trace the grain in wood. He acknowledged it. He wrote that sometimes the nights were a little longer than usual, and in those stretches he spoke out loud to the sea. He wrote that the sea did not mind. The pages filled and did not empty him. They enlarged the room quietly. When the light shifted toward evening, he gathered the pages into an envelope and addressed it, not with a name, but with the words, "To the one who keeps watch after me." He did not know who that would be. Lighthouses outlast their keepers. Islands outlast lighthouses. He sealed the letter, tied it with string, and set it on the highest shelf beside the star map. That night, he did not go to the cairn. He sat with the lamp. He watched the pattern begin again and ease apart. He practiced remembering. A week later, the supply boat came, shoulders of men in thick sweaters, a radio that laughed and crackled, the smell of diesel and rope. One of the deckhands was new, a woman with hair braided under a wool cap and eyes that made careful study of everything. She introduced herself as Mara. "You won't need much," she said, glancing at his list. "The island feeds you other ways." He smiled at the truth inside her jest. "It does." They spoke as barrels were rolled, as crates were handed, as rope was coiled. She asked if the stars were truly clear this far out. He said they were not clearer, only more patient with those who looked. On impulse that surprised him, he fetched a different envelope, a smaller one, and slipped inside a copy of the triangle he had traced. Not the map page, but a neat drawing done from memory, with the words, "When the lantern winks." He sealed it and wrote only, "For Mara, when the night feels long." He did not know why this felt correct, only that the island's quiet had taught him to honor such feelings. Before the boat pushed off, he handed it to her. For later, he said. She took it the way one takes a warmed stone on a cold day. Thank you, she said, and her voice had a gentleness he recognized, a gentleness taught by water and wind. That night, the wind went hard and then gentle again. The lamp held its steady arc. Elias kept watch with a feeling like a thread had been tied between the island and somewhere else. Not tight, not pulling, just connecting. Chapter 4. The Memory Beneath the Stone. Winter came softly, then all at once. The ocean darkened and grew thoughtful. The garden slept under a careful blanket of straw. Elias's boots learned a different sound on the steps, the hush of felt over cold iron. He continued to visit the cairn once a week, at different hours. Sometimes the moon wore her full toast glow and made the stones shine. Sometimes the night was new and close, so he carried the lantern low and let it show him a little at a time. He did not move the stones again until the solstice, when the sky felt like a bell that had just been rung and the air held its breath. On that night, he carried not a lantern, but a small, flat brush and a jar of warm water. He knelt by the cairn and uncovered the slate. He dipped the brush and, ever so gently, washed the carved lines. The water made the shallow etchings darker and suddenly legible, the way memory becomes clear when spoken to kindly. There were more lines than he had noticed. Not words, but marks like notches, placed along the curves between the stars. They mirrored not seasons, but intervals, as if the carver had tracked how long the pattern held before it thinned. In the lower corner, almost lost to time, there was a mark like a spiral. He did not know it, and yet it felt like news he had always suspected. He stared until the cold asked him to move. He dried the slate with the rim of his scarf. He replaced the cairn stone by stone, slower than before. Then he sat with his back to the stones, as he had done so many times, and listened to the sea. A new habit entered him. After that night, he began to keep not just notes, but intervals. He drew spirals by hand until they resembled the one on the slate, without trying to imitate it exactly. He learned that every time he thought a pattern reached its end, it took one quiet breath and continued, smaller, like echoes stepping down a staircase. He smiled at that, the island teaching him the shape of continuance. The supply boat came less often in winter. On the first January run, it arrived under a sky the color of pewter. Mara stepped onto the stone with the same careful confidence of those who know that anything solid can still be slippery. She laughed when the wind stole her cap and chased it down without hurry. I brought you oranges, she said, and the bright color in her hand looked like a summer sun that had agreed to be small for a while. They spoke over crates and rope again. He asked her how the nights were on her coast. Shorter when I read, she said. Shorter when I listen. Once, long ago, I stayed up to watch the stars. I fell asleep and woke to snow. The world was clean, as bread dough before the bake. He nodded. He told her of the spiral and the intervals. She listened the way one balances on a dock, the ears swaying with the body to feel the information. Before she left, she said, I tried your triangle on a map. I didn't get it right, but I liked the trying. Elias felt the warmth of that. That evening, he wrote another letter to the one who keeps watch in the city. He described the way ice formed like lace on the lighthouse's eastern windows and melted at noon into drops that slid down like slow bells. He wrote that some secrets prefer to be carried between two people like a bench carried by its ends, lighter that way. A month later, the weather turned. A storm came that did not announce itself with theatrics, but with the authority of a guest who knows the house and its doors. The ocean heaved, but did not shout. The wind did not whistle around the lamp room, so much as fill it and become an organ note. Elias secured what needed securing, as he had been taught and as he had learned. He made tea and spoke aloud to the walls and the lens and the flame. "Steady," he said. "Steady, dear." The lamp held. The island held. He slept in brief pages of time, on a cot beneath the stair. And when the storm left, it left the air scrubbed of haste. At dawn, he walked to the cairn. It was untouched. He stood there a long time, and when he turned, he saw a line in the snow, a narrow line, as if a single fox had brushed past and laid a signature. He followed it until it ended, not at a den, but at the sailor's eye stone. He laughed into the cold. "You see, too," he told the island. Chapter 5. The Line That Remains. Spring did not rush, but it arrived with an affection that felt earned. The garden lifted a damp green shoulder. The cove stones warmed enough to hold footprints a little longer. The lighthouse's windows opened and did not complain about the salt. One afternoon, a postcard arrived on the supply boat. The picture showed a harbor town with houses steep as conversation. On the back was written, "When the night felt long, I looked up. The lantern winked. Thank you." Ah, sir. The card sat on Elias's desk like a visiting cup of tea. That evening, he climbed the tower with a different awareness. That the lamp did not only show a path to ship captains, it also blinked occasionally at those who needed a sign that steadiness still existed. The star map felt less like an inheritance and more like a shared instrument. The nights grew shorter, and yet the triangle visited again, smaller, with that same gentle authority. He made no pilgrimage now. He let the pattern find him where he was. He learned that part of keeping watch is letting the thing you watch shape your life without demanding from it a meaning tied with a bow. In early summer, a letter arrived, not a postcard, this time addressed to him by name. Inside was a single page in spare handwriting. "Dear Keeper, I used to be afraid of the places that held silence. I thought silence meant absence. I am learning it can mean presence I do not yet know how to hear. Your triangle helped. I kept watch with it. A small thing happened, a sense of company. Perhaps this is the island, working far away." Elias read it twice, then went to the lamp room and set the letter near the map, the way musicians lay scores side by side. He realized then that the star key had unlocked something, just not what he had first imagined. It had opened a corridor between watchfulnesses. On a night thick with summer's perfume, a sweet blend of warmed rock, sea kelp, and distant pine sap, he returned to the cairn one last time that season. He lifted the stones and uncovered the slate, and this time he did bring a piece of paper and a stick of charcoal. He took a rubbing, not perfect, but good, of the carved pattern and the spiral. He thought of the many hands that had drawn these lines, of the long patience that had kept them. He added, very small, in his own corner, "We remember together." Before dawn, he replaced each stone and smoothed the moss with his palm. He walked back to the lighthouse as the east went from pearl to rose to a shy gold. He climbed and extinguished the lamp when its work was done. He stood a time with the window open, letting the warm wind braid his hair. Below him, the island sighed like someone who had finished a long, good book and closed it softly. After breakfast, Elias made a new envelope and wrote on it, "To be given when the new keeper arrives." Inside, he placed the letter to the future watcher, the charcoal rubbing, and a small note on the lighthouse ledger that said, "Look beneath the cairn, but do not take. Touch. Remember. Share the pattern with someone who needs it." Years would pass. Perhaps he would leave Northwind when his knees asked for fewer steps, and his breath for shorter climbs. Perhaps the lighthouse would change its lamp. Perhaps someone else would call the cove Hushwater and know precisely why, but the line would remain, a connection drawn between a steady light and steady hearts, between the stars' slow agreements and human patience. The key would continue to be what it had always been, not to open, but to see. Tonight, the sea breathed, and the beam wrote its slow, reliable script across the water. Elias sat with a cup of tea and watched the sky assemble and loosen. Somewhere on a distant coast, perhaps Mara looked up and felt a small, unmistakable companionship. If you are listening now, perhaps you feel it too. A kind presence that asks nothing and gives the shape of calm. The world holds many quiet corridors. When you are ready, walk them at the pace of your own breath. The map is not above or below. It is in the way you keep watch, in the way you light your lamp, in the way you see what has always been there, patient as stars. Good night. May the key find you just as gently, and may you remember, again and again, that not all doors are meant to open. Some are meant to remind you that you are already inside.